Hello students, welcome in one another lecture of subject Public Health Engineering. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss the next part of unit number 3, that is the service reservoirs. In last lecture, we had discussed the water distribution systems. In that there is a three systems. First is a gravity system, second is the pumping system, and third is the combined system. After that, in today's lecture we are going to discuss next point, that is the service reservoirs. Now see what is the service reservoirs. Service reservoirs are the tanks constructed in RCC or can be fabricated to store the treated water to the distribution to various water users of town. The service reservoir is a tank, or it is a RCC or fabricated tank which can be used to store the water which can be treated in water treatment plant, and this water is distributed to the various towns or various water users. After that, the next point is the functions of service reservoirs. Now see what are the functions of service reservoirs. First function is it provides and maintains desired pressure in the distribution system. The service reservoirs provide and maintain the desired pressure of water into the distribution system. Then it provides emergency storage for fire fighting, failure of pump or power. The service reservoir store the water, or this water is used for the emergency in the case of firefighting, or in the case of failure of pump, or in the case of power is cut off. Then the third function is it decreases the pressure fluctuations. It decreases the fluctuations into the pressure of water. Then pumps can be operated to store the reservoir at constant rate. In the case we are use pumping to store water into service reservoir, then these pumps are operated at the constant rate. When water demand and supply are fluctuated, then it can be balanced by service reservoir. When water demand and water supply is different or it can be get fluctuated, then the difference or balance between demand and supply is maintained by the service reservoirs. These are the functions of service reservoirs. Then the next function is it absorbs hourly variation in demand. If there is a variation in demand, that is at early morning there is a large use of water, then at evening there is a large use of water, and at the daytime there is a very few use of water, then this variation is absorbed by the service reservoir. It reduces the size of pipes and capacities of the pump, and hence it makes the distribution system economical. Due to service reservoir there is a high pressure to the water, then it can be reduce the size of pipe, then it also reduce the capacity of pump, and it can be make the distribution system economical. After that, the next point is the types of service reservoir. There is a two types or two classifications, sorry, there is a three classifications of the service reservoirs. In that, first is a classification based on material used in construction, second is a classification based on the shape of tank, and third is a classification based on the elevation with respect to ground. This service reservoir is classified into these three types. Now see, first is classification based on the material used in construction. First is RCC, second masonry, third steel reservoir. According to material, the service reservoirs are classified into the RCC reservoirs, then masonry reservoirs, and steel reservoirs. Then classification based on the shape of tank. According to the shape of tank, the reservoirs are classified into the circular reservoirs and rectangular reservoirs. Then, according to the elevation with respect to ground, the reservoirs are classified as surface reservoir, elevated reservoirs, and stand pipes. Now we discuss these classification based on the elevation with respect to ground. First is the surface reservoir. Now see what is the surface reservoir. When the reservoir is constructed on the ground or below the ground level is termed as the surface reservoir. When the reservoir are constructed on ground or below the normal ground level, then this reservoir is called as a surface reservoir. Such type of reservoir are circular or rectangular in shape. The shape of this type of reservoir is circular or rectangular and constructed in 2 or 3 compartments during repair and maintenance. And these reservoirs are constructed into 2 or 3 compartments because during or the time of repair and maintenance, the water is stored into the compartments. Two compartments are interconnected by shut-off valves. There is a connection between two compartments and these compartments are connected by the shut-off valves. Then surface reservoirs are therefore one of the most important adaptation technologies in regions with the limited and varying water availability. The surface reservoirs are important at the region where the limit or the availability of water is varying or less. This is the surface reservoir. See the picture. This is surface reservoir which is constructed on the ground or it is a below the ground level. Then after surface reservoir, next is the elevated reservoir. Now see what is the elevated reservoir. Now see the elevated reservoirs. These are the elliptical overheaded tanks erected at a certain suitable elevation above the GI and supported on tower. The elevated reservoirs are elliptical overheaded tanks. These are the elliptical in shape and erected at certain suitable elevation, and it can be constructed or erected at certain suitable elevation. Hence, it is called as a elevated reservoir above the GI and supported on towers, and these are supported on towers. They are constructed in the areas combined gravity and pumping system for the distribution adopted. These elevated reservoirs are constructed at the area where we are going to use combined gravity plus pumping system at a time for the water distribution. Water pumped into these reservoirs from the filter units from the service reservoir and then supplied to the consumer. That is, water is pumped to the elevated reservoirs from the filter units or from the service reservoirs, and then from elevated reservoir it can be supplied to the consumers. These reservoirs are made of RCC, steel or pre-stressed concrete. The elevated reservoirs are made up of steel or RCC or pre-stressed concrete. See, this is the elevated reservoir. After that, the next point is the stand pipes. Now see what is a stand pipe. Stand pipes are a kind of elevated tanks without any erected tower for resting on body. These stand pipes are the one kind of elevated tanks which without or which don't have the erected towers or any support for the resting body. These are they are thus tall cylindrical shells resting directly on ground. These are in cylindrical shapes or tall cylindrical shells and it directly rests on the ground. What is a standpipes? Standpipes are a kind of elevated tanks without any erected towers for resting the body. They are thus tall cylindrical shell resting directly on the ground. See, this is the stand pipe. Hope you all get these points which can be seen in today's lecture, that is a service reservoir and their types. Now we just revise these points and the points which is we had seen in last lecture. See, just we revise this point again for remember. First is a method of distribution of water, which can be we had discussed in last lecture. There is a three method of water distribution. First is pumping system, then second is a gravity system, then third is a combined system. After that, in today's lecture, we had discussed the service reservoirs. What is the definition of service reservoir? Service reservoir are the tanks constructed in RCC or can be fabricated to store the treated water to be distributed to the various water users of town. Sorry. After that, we had discussed the functions of service reservoir. Then we had discussed the types of service reservoir. The types of service reservoir are reservoirs are classified into three types. First is based on material. In that, first is RCC reservoir, second is a masonry, and third is a steel. After that, next is a based on shape. Based on shape, there is a two types of reservoirs. First is a circular and second is a rectangular. After that, next is a classification based on elevation with respect to ground. In that, the reservoir is classified into three types. First is a surface reservoir, second is the elevated reservoir, and third is the stand pipe. Hope you get the reservoirs and the types of reservoirs. Thank you.